So we've been wandering on this Lenten journey, a journey that started a few weeks ago when we were in the desert with Jesus, and we had to wrestle with those voices that tempt us to be less than the authentic person God created us to be. Those voices we all hear from time to time, the voices that come from our culture or our media or our traditions or some other place, but they suggest that somehow we're not right by just being who we authentically are, and that we should be maybe something different than the person God created us to be. And then last week, we found ourselves on the mountain with Jesus. And there, our hearts and our minds and our eyes were opened to that radiant splendor of God's very real presence among us. Now today, we find ourselves sitting at the well, taking a bit of a break from this journey. But we're in a place where we have to choose between two very different ways of life. We have to make a choice based on where our journey has been so far. Are we going to live the life of the desert, the life that's constantly wrestling with selfishness and image? Who are we going to be? Or are we going to live the life on the mountain with eyes and hearts and minds fully aware of God's very presence among us? It's a very, very human choice that we all make, and Jesus himself made it. To help us understand how Jesus faced it and what he did, hopefully what we will do, John gives us this wonderful story, a simple story of a simple woman at a simple well. But to really understand what's going on here, it helps if we get a bit of a background on this thing. In that time and place, it was entirely inappropriate, more than inappropriate. It was forbidden for men and women to intermingle in public. Not only was it just not done, not only was it taboo, it was forbidden by the culture and the religion. It just couldn't happen. So the women would come to the well, a very public place. The well was a public place where people would gather. The women would come in the early morning and in the evening and get the water they needed for the day and for the night, and that's when they would congregate. They would stay away during the rest of the day so that they wouldn't risk encountering a man. So when this woman shows up, this Samaritan woman, at high noon, in the middle of the day, and Jesus happens to be there taking a break from his journey, he knows exactly what's going on. He understands the only reason this woman would make her visit to the well in the heat of the day, when the sun is at its highest, is because she wasn't welcome in the mornings and in the evenings. For whatever reason, whatever her story was, whatever she had done, whatever she hadn't done, she was being ostracized and shunned by her community, and she couldn't go visit the well when the other women did, so she had to sneak off when there was the least chance of encountering someone else. Jesus happens to be there. He reads the situation immediately. Now, if he listens to the voices of his tradition, every voice that he has heard since he was a child, if he listens to that, he will keep his distance. There's no question about that. He will back off and keep his distance. And yet he doesn't. And yet he doesn't. Because as soon as he sees her there, he understands what's going on, and he senses her isolation. He senses her loneliness and her pain, and he can't help but reach out to her. He can't stop himself. He can't help but reach out to her, because that's what love does. Love reaches out to those who are hurt and lost and lonely and isolated, and it lifts them up. So that's what Jesus does. It doesn't matter to him that she's a woman. It doesn't matter to him that she's a Samaritan. It doesn't matter to him that she has a sordid history. He reaches out to her anyway, much to the discomfort and the dismay of his apostles. He reaches out to her and says, "You do have a home. You do have a place where you are valued. You do have a place where you are loved unconditionally, and that place is right here with me." And he says it to her as surely as he says it to each one of us. When he says, it doesn't matter if you're Anglo or Hispanic. It doesn't matter if you speak English or Spanish. It doesn't matter if you are conservative or liberal, Christian or Buddhist, gay or straight, right or left, young or old, rich or poor. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. You are a child of God, and you have a place where you are loved unconditionally, where you are valued. You have a home here with me, no matter what, always. And of course, we know this. We know this because we've been taught this since we were 5 years old. Jesus loves everybody. We've always been taught that Jesus loves everybody. But what difference does that make to us? And that's the question that we have to wrestle with as we sit at that well at his side. What difference does it make to us? What difference does it make to how we live our lives? Do we see the value of every person? Are we going to respond like the Samaritan woman, who was filled with exuberance and energy and couldn't stop herself from running back out into her community, into the marketplace, to the very people who had rejected her and ostracized her? She couldn't stop but run out to them. She couldn't hold herself back. She dropped her jug and ran forth to tell everyone and to share with them what had just been shared with her. Are we going to respond with that sort of excitement and energy and eagerness to reach across the divides? Or are we more likely to respond like the apostles, who sort of said, whoa, hold on, Jesus. Not quite sure I'm ready for that sort of radical love. Not sure that we're ready to live with that sort of unabashed recklessness. A little uncomfortable with this. How are we going to respond? With the eagerness of the Samaritan woman, or with the reservation of the apostles? We live in a time and a place that's not so different. Not so different from Samaria of 2,000 years ago. We might be more subtle about it. We might be a little less overt. But the reality is we still live in a world in which we've created all kinds of mechanisms that divide people. Politics, economics, political national borders, even religions sometimes. The list goes on and on. the number of different mechanisms that we have in place to help us define who's with us, who's against us, who's an insider, who's an outsider. We have every bit as many mechanisms that divide people. So how are we going to respond? We stand here today at the well of our community, and we have to make a choice. Are we more likely to respond as the desert self, the self that keeps our love small, sharing it only in the shadows with the people of whom we approve? Or are we going to share it from the mountains, like the Samaritan woman, with the courage and the brazen boldness to let our love shine in the noonday sun for all the world to share?